guest in this edition of Veterans Chronicles is Bill Dawson, one of the original Navy frogmen, which were known formally as the Naval Combat Demolition Unit, the precursor to the Navy SEALs. He is also a World War II veteran. And Bill, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Tell us where you were born and raised.
I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I went to Chamberlain High School, and when I graduated from Chamberlain, I went straight to work at the Washington Navy Yard. I didn't stay too long at the yard because I got interested in going in the service, and everybody around me was going in the service, so I took a day off and went down and joined the Navy.
Was this after Pearl Harbor?
Yes, it was. A short period after Pearl, but it seemed like everybody was going into the military. It seemed like the thing to do.
How old were you when you joined the service?
I was 17 years old. I went in for what was called a minority cruise, 17 to 21. And fortunately, the war ended, and I got out when I was 21.
Why did you choose the Navy?
Well, I'd always liked the Navy. Even when I was a young kid, my mother bought me a Navy uniform, which is a picture in my album of me and my mother at the cherry blossoms when I was about 5 years old.
So then after you joined the Navy, you had the opportunity to volunteer for this special unit, correct?
Well, when I got out of boot camp, I volunteered for submarine service. But they told me that the class was full and they didn't need anyone else. I didn't exactly know what I was going to do. And two officers came into boot camp and give a speech on this new outfit that was starting. They didn't say much about it other than you learn to blow things up. I didn't exactly know how to take that, but we went, another fellow and I went around to sign up for the class, and they had the doors closed, and they said they had all the applicants they needed. They had over 500 applicants. So this other kid and I, we walked around for a few minutes, and then we decided we wanted to join anyway. So we went around the back of the building, piled up some crates and climbed into an open window. We got at the end of the line, and out of 500 applicants, they picked 52 men, and we were two. The next thing I know, we were on a train to Florida.
So then you did some training at Fort Pierce, which probably made boot camp seem pretty easy. What did they make you do at Fort Pierce?
It's hard to explain the training that we went through. I was in pretty fair shape. I'd been an athlete most of my life, and I was in pretty good shape. But what they put us through down there, it was hard to explain. They pushed you to your limit, and if you didn't make it, you were gone. You were out. They put us through what they call log PT, 3 to 5 mile run on the beach, crawling through the jungles, the swamps, and everything they had in Florida. Some of the men didn't quite make up to it, and they dropped out. But there were quite a few of us that made it. And they divided us into 5-man units. They call them Naval Combat Demolition Units. 5 men and an officer, which we started competing against each other in various categories. Rubber boat drills. They take the rubber boats out in the high surf, and the surf would throw the boat one way and the men and all would be scattered in different directions. It was something else. And they had stone jetties off the coast, and they made us climb over those jetties in high surf, and lots of times men would slip down, and the stones were slippery from seal water and everything, and you'd slip down in those stones and get cut by the barnacles that were attached to the stones. It laid a couple of the men up in the hospital for a few days. They got cut up pretty bad. Some of us managed to survive it.
I read one story where they had you passing huge logs to one another to prepare you for carrying large boxes of ammunition.
Well, log PT was something else. You'd line up with different units, or a couple of units together, and toss these logs back and forth. I can still pick out the splinters out of my arms from some of those logs. I understand they still use the log PTs in the training today.
So why didn't you quit? You could have quit at, I'm sure, many different times and probably felt like it. Why didn't you?
Well, there's times when I actually wanted to quit. I would lay down and cry at times. But I think the sandflies and mosquitoes were so bad, I think they kept me going. They actually helped pick me up and get out of the wherever I was. But it's unbelievable. They had stopped all mosquito control. You just couldn't believe how many mosquitoes and sandflies there were. Like I say, I almost rang the bell, like they say, and fortunately I managed to keep it together. And I'm glad today that I passed everything and got through, because what we started back 70-some years ago ended up what it is today, the best and the greatest.
What was it like when you passed and you were part of that small fraction that survived and successfully completed the training?
Well, we completed our training at Fort Pierce. They didn't waste any time in shipping us out, because they needed what we did, what we'd been trained for. They needed on the beaches, or some of the beaches where they were invading. I forget, there was 2 or 3 units that we trained with, went to Normandy. And Normandy hit the beaches with the obstacles that we had been trained to blow. They had 53% casualties alone in demolition. That fortunately, a couple of the units that did live through it came to the Pacific and operated with us. And we went all through New Guinea, the Philippines, and Borneo, and we participated in 12 invasions. Actually, there were, if I remember correctly, there were 36 various invasions, but the units were divided up equally so they would all go equally to different places. like I say, we made Unit 2 and 3, went 4 in New Guinea, 6 in the Philippines, and 2 in Borneo. We were very fortunate. We didn't run into the obstacles like they did in Normandy. But what we ran into was sandbars and coral reefs. There was a difference in blowing those than it was obstacles. You could figure out a formula how to blow an obstacle, but with sandbars and coral reefs, you just have to more or less guess. And fortunately, we guessed right on our first invasion. Our job was successful, and we blew a number of channels for the landing craft to get ashore with the troops and supplies.
Sir, let me stop you right there. We'll come right back with another segment on Veterans Chronicles with one of the original frogmen of the U.S. Navy, Bill Dawson. We are back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Bill Dawson, a veteran of the U.S. Navy and World War II, and he was one of the original Navy frogmen. And sir, you were just starting to describe your first mission. Walk us through the preparation for a mission like that and what you have to be ready to do.
Well, we usually go in early and make reconnaissance of what we're running into. You didn't know whether the beach might have been mined and booby trapped or obstacles or anything, but most everywhere we went there was sand and coral reefs. And after you blow 1 or 2, you more or less fall into a routine of how much explosives you need. After you figured out how much you wanted, you always added just a little bit more to make sure you did the job.
So that first mission, you mentioned that you had to guess with coral reefs, and you said it turned out to be a success. How did you figure out how much demolition you needed?
Actually, some of it was guesswork. You always figured out a formula of some kind. And like I say, to make sure, you always threw in a little extra to make damn sure.
At the beginning of a mission, how did you get to the coral reef or the sandbar without being detected by the enemy?
Well, there's not much chance of not being detected. You have to take the chance of going in. Once they decided or knew we were coming, it was just an ongoing thing that we tried to do what we had to do. It had to be done before the troops come in. You just work under fire. Lots of times the big guns would scare the enemy out of their emplacements on the beaches. The big guns and the planes and stuff would shell the beaches and run them out of the camps and all, which would help us an awful lot. As lots of times we got ashore, they had evacuated their camps and headed for the hills. It made our work a little bit easier too.
What did you have with you, if anything, to defend yourself?
Nothing whatsoever. We had a knife. We did an awful lot of swimming in what they called jungle boots. They were canvas boots with rubber soles. And we swam in the rubber boots and long pants because we worked an awful lot in coral. And the coral would cut you like a razor and get infected just as quick.
Was it what you expected on that first mission?
Well, we really didn't know what to expect. And you had to take what came, whether you liked it or not. And how dangerous it was is another thing, but We had a job to do, and we were trained to do it. And I think we got it done very well.
You mentioned you eventually got to the point where you kind of had a system as you went from mission to mission, but given those very risky circumstances, was anything ever routine? I mean, everything's got to be a special circumstance, right?
What you would call routine, I wouldn't say was on the list anywhere along the line. Most of the beaches, well, like I say, were coral reefs, sandbars. But you didn't know whether they were going to be mined or booby-trapped or anything in that category. At one time, we was working off a rubber boats. We carried explosive in and we were unloading off of the boat. And the snipers located us and started firing. Well, there wasn't no place to go but behind a rubber boat, of all places. That wasn't much protection. So you started doing diving, staying on the water as long as you could, move from one place to another, and hope that they didn't have a lucky shot at you.
How much time did you give yourselves to clear out when you were blowing up the coral reef?
The only time you would be limited to a job is making sure that it was done before the troops started coming in small boats and their equipment and everything. We had to have those channels blown and have everything clear. So.
Did you have to wait for them to come ashore to get back to your ship, or did you swim back?
Oh, we spent most of that in the water to make sure everything had been done. Lots of times we would, big guns were firing over our heads and mostly clearing the beachheads or the camps of an enemy. And we would, once we'd finished our job, we'd go ashore and go through the camps.
Sir, let me stop you right there. We'll come right back with one of the original frogmen of the U.S. Navy, Bill Dawson. Our guest today in studio is Bill Dawson. He's a veteran of the U.S. Navy and World War II and was one of the original frogmen. In fact, he's the last of the original frogmen, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Sir, we were talking about how your missions unfolded as you cleared the way for troops and other boats to come ashore with materials and so forth. Once you blew up the coral reef, what did you do to test whether that had been enough to clear those channels?
We made sure when we laid the explosive on the coral reef that it would blow it evenly, and like Bangalore torpedoes come in boxes of 5 foot in length. If you took them out of the box, you could hook the Bangalores together with couplings. And they mainly use them on beaches to clear barbed wire. They would hook them on together and slide them underneath barbed wire. And it would just blow barbed wire clean. And the troops could get through those openings. But when we laid ours on the coral reef, we put the boxes together, connected everything up. The same as rubber hose was 2 foot, 30 foot in length and 2 pounds of explosive to the foot. And we laid all this hose side by side and in lengths of 30 foot and connected them all together. So when they all blew, it blew everything evenly.
You mentioned earlier how you were broken up into groups of 5 plus an officer. Did you have the same team on all those missions?
Unit 2 and 3 stayed together for 2 years in the Pacific. We were very fortunate that we could stay together. There were other units that were broken up later on where they decided that the 5-man units wasn't large enough to do the jobs. So they went to 80-man teams and 15 officers and give them more men to work with and everything. But we managed to do most of our jobs just working together. We had teamwork. We stayed together for the 2 years, like I say. We were supposed to be transferred back to Maui for advanced training. They were getting ready to go into Japan, and they wanted everybody to be advanced in training in anything that we could possibly run into on their beaches. We were going to be trained to take care of. So on the way back to Maui, we fortunately got leave. They sent us home on annual leave. While we were home, the war ended, which we were very fortunate. We didn't have to go back.
You mentioned how blessed you were to have this team stay intact for the full 2 years. How much did that help to know exactly what everyone's role was and that you knew everyone knew exactly what they should be doing?
Anybody that has spent 2 years, morning, noon, and night together, you know a person pretty well. And I think we knew each other better than brothers, but we had teamwork, and we got along wonderful.
Did you ever have any close calls with explosives going off too early or in any other way?
We did have a few explosives that didn't detonate, and we had to recap one and try again. We were very fortunate in most all of our charges, whether we set them electrically or by fuse. They went off on time, except the one that was underwater a few feet, and I had to dive down to recap it. And just before I went off the rubber boat, this big sea snake swam by. And he was about half as long as that rubber hose and pretty good sizing body. But I had to wait, make sure he was out of sight before I went in. And I dove down and we pulled the hose back up, recapped it, and didn't have any problem after that.
You talked a little bit about when you would go ashore that you were able to collect some of the propaganda, the Japanese propaganda against the Allies. What got you started in collecting and keeping all that?
We were very fortunate to get into some of the camps before the Army even come in. But once the Army went through, there wasn't much left to anything to collect. The big guns and planes, they cleared the beaches and the camps out pretty well before we went in. Few souvenirs.
Well, let's talk about a couple other things that are in your book, and I should tell our listeners and our viewers that your book is Before They Were Seals, They Were Frogs. And you talk in there that between missions, you're obviously on the boat most of the time, and a lot of that time you had to fend off Japanese aerial attacks. Talk about that a little bit.
According to my official records, I did nothing, saw nothing. But I happened to keep a private log of my own, which I wasn't supposed to. But I didn't bring that log out for 70 years, so nobody knew about it. And now it's out and everybody can read it. Almost every harbor we pulled into, we were in combat for the whole, sometimes the whole day or night. Planes would come over and pick out the largest ship in the harbor and dive straight for it. The kamikaze and suicide planes that were all loaded with high explosives. And once they hit a ship, it's pretty well gone. They took out an awful lot of ships. They barely missed our ship once. They used to, in convoy, they would fly in low from the outside and use the smaller ships for protection to get into the larger ships inside the convoy. Sometimes they made it, and most of the times they didn't. It's quite a sight to see these planes come in at night. The harbor would be lit up with anti-aircraft fire going all directions. And the planes, when they come in and hit some of the ships, the explosions that it made. We were very fortunate with all the explosives that we had on board. If they had ever hit us, I used to say that it would leave a hole in the ocean, take a week to fill up.
You mentioned earlier where some of your frogman missions were, such as New Guinea and Borneo. You also mentioned the Philippines, and if I have this right, your group helped to clear the return of General MacArthur to the Philippines, correct?
We always said that we were MacArthur's frogmen, and we always got ashore before he did. But I got pictures of him a couple times after he'd come ashore with his staff and everything. We'd be walking down a country road, or I never got to talk to him.
How special was that moment? Did you realize then that the Allies had a great deal of momentum?
Oh, yeah, we pretty well knew that we were winning the war to a point. At least we felt that way. As everywhere we went and everything we did, we were moving forward. We were taking over islands after island, especially the islands with airstrips on them. They wanted the airstrips so we could make advancements against other islands.
Sir, you mentioned a little while ago that you were on leave when the war ended. What did you do then?
My minority cruise was over. I got out when I was 21. I hopped around different jobs here and there. And finally, somebody came and talked to me about joining the D.C. Fire Department. That sounded like good to me. So I'll go give it a try. Yeah, I joined the fire department, and I was appointed Engine 7. But I didn't stay there very long. I had friends working at Engine 8. They got me transferred to their company. And we had a good bunch of young men that it was sort of like in the service. You had teamwork. You either worked together or you didn't work at all. But in the fire department, you have to work together. You look after each other. It's, I put 25 years in the fire department, and I enjoyed it. I've been retired, I guess, 42 years now. And I still go back, and friends of mine take me in and show me some of the advancements the fire department has made. And it's unbelievable. When I was driving the wagon, I didn't even have a cab to cover me in the wintertime when it was rough. I looked up in the driver's seat of a wagon at one company I was visiting. They had a computer sitting in the seat with them. They could tell where any place they wanted to go. More gauges to read. They've got cabs protecting them. It's quite a change.
Sir, let's take one more break, and we'll come back with a few more minutes with Bill Dawson, veteran of World War II and one of the original Frogmen. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined in studio today by Bill Dawson, veteran of World War II, veteran of the U.S. Navy, and one of the original Frogmen. And we've been talking about his service in World War II, and what does it mean to you that you were one of those trailblazers, one of those original Frogmen that paved the way for the likes of the Navy SEALs today?
Never realized it when we were doing it, even after I got out and come home. But then the Navy SEALs began to get popular. They were making headlines everywhere. It makes me feel good to know what we started has developed into one of the greatest outfits in the world. And the things they do today, I only wish I could do half of them.
But you did do them when you needed to. Have you ever had the opportunity to return to any of the places where you served during the war, whether it's New Guinea or the Philippines or anywhere else?
No, I haven't been overseas. I just soon not leave the States. I've been to various countries and all, and I don't think there's anything over there I'm missing out on. There's probably still places in the United States I'd still like to see. I've been mostly all over this country, and every state has its own beauty. And I'm sorry I haven't got around to see more of it. I haven't too much traveling at my age anymore, but I still love to travel. There's still a lot out there that I haven't seen I would like to see.
How well did you stay in touch with the members of your team after the war?
A number of them I stayed in touch with. If I remember correctly, it's 3 from North Carolina. I used to go down to Great Smokies, visit one of them. He'd take me out for a ride at night up in the mountains, and he'd stop alongside the road. And he'd say, "I'll be back in a minute." And he'd stop the car, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And he'd get out the car, and he'd only be gone a few minutes. And he'd come back. He'd hand me a mason jar. A mason jar was pretty potent. I haven't had any of that in a long time. Another full-blooded Indian, Sam Patapony, from Oklahoma. I used to visit him and his wife occasionally. Sam and I got along real well. He was a good man to have beside you, no matter what kind of a situation you got in. I remember I used to put the gloves on with him. He decided for me that I did not want to be a fighter. Because I don't know where the gloves come from, but he sure could throw them. We're scattered out different parts of the country. And then my officer, Frank Kane, he was discharged alongside the rest of us after the war. But he got recalled and went back into the Navy SEALs and made Captain Kane.
Well, sir, we thank you so much for your service to our country, and we thank you for being here today. Thank you very much.
You.
Bill Dawson, veteran of World War II, veteran of the U.S. Navy, one of the original Navy frogmen. His book is Before They Were SEALs, They Were Frogs. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Columbus, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.